and this is both IT related and media related, so it overlaps. I get really fucking annoyed when people talk about security stuff from like I know I've definitely lost my shit in the past on Tumblr when people have talked about like, Tor is completely captured by the CIA and it was developed by the Navy, so it's, impossible to use with any form of security because it's just used as a spying tool. And like, there are a few creators who do this in this space that like I get really fucking pissed at. People, there are like four dimensions that I get aggro about this. And one of them is something that you can see. Where did I have it? I got grumpy, so I opened Windows. There we go, Proton Yelling, that's what I named this group. So the example that I wanted to use about one of the things that deeply irritates me is this discussion on privacy guides. So the deal is you get deep enough into any like security community, any InfoSec community, and you're going to find people who are really fucking annoying about what counts as security. And they're going to be really kind of over the top on this. So one of the things that happens a lot in this thread is people going back and forth on like semantics on like, this is, can you actually use crypto to do this? Is crypto actually secure? Crypto, by the way, is not actually secure. Crypto is not anonymous anyway. But like, you get people who just really want to win the conversation. And that's one thing that I find deeply annoying when people are doing communication about InfoSec and security stuff, because they discourage the normies. Like, it's an issue. They're being too abnormal. They're being non-communicative. They're being Linux-headed, Linux-brained, and it is preventing people from doing security shit. So I understand why the person on Tumblr circulated the post yesterday about, guess it's time to look for a new VPN, because that person is an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, like security-focused person who is also like very into like activist spaces and everything like that. And I guess I can see where they're coming from. The problem is that if you are like an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, security-focused person who spends a lot of time in activist spaces, and your post takes off, it scares normal people on Tumblr who definitely are probably just using Proton Mail as a way to keep their email mildly more private, so that they're not using Google, so that we're not all just giving more information and more data and more attention and more clicks to Google. And it's making them less secure because, even if not every email is secure in Proton Mail by default, it does make it easier to send private and encrypted emails if they want to. It lowers the barrier of entry for being secure, but when security people get all fucking Linux brained about it, they just they make it inaccessible. And so this is like the start to failure Linux stream, frustrating because I don't want people getting scared off from this stuff, and people are so bad at communicating these issues that it does scare them. But at the same time, legitimately, this is not something that you can kind of do like a single course education on. And part of the reason that the roller derby thing came up was because of the person who had reblogged my post about not committing crime by like talking about like, sometimes I jaywalk or cross the street against the light or whatever. Yeah, like the problem is that I have people all the fucking time coming into my Tumblr inbox, like asking me how to commit crimes. I am not going to tell you how to commit crimes. It's a very bad idea for you to come here and ask me how to commit a crime. And it's putting me at risk and you at risk by coming and sending a Tumblr ask about that, because the data is not secure, it's not private. But people don't know that the Tumblr asks aren't private. They don't understand that just because the blogger who you're sending an ask anonymously to doesn't know who you are, Tumblr does. Tumblr knows where that IP address was. Tumblr knows if you were logged in and just turned on the Ask Anonymously. And people don't understand that about computers. So the deal with the 404 media story is, let's see if they changed the title. Yeah, so the title's still the same. And basically what's happened here, Proton keeps very, very little user data, and they're very open about what data they keep. Their TOS explains the sort of information that they hold on to. And their user base is a user base that tends to be pretty aware of what's in their TOS, what's in their privacy and security policy, because they're specifically coming to Proton looking for privacy and security. But the problem is that they also are dealing with a user base that gets told by people like me, go use Proton Mail because it's better than using Google, it's more private, but not qualifying that more private does not mean private per se. Or that like there is a specific definition of privacy that you need to be aware of as you are going into it that is very difficult to like rules lawyer and caveat every single time you say anything about it. So the thing that actually helped the FBI is that there was a legal order from Switzerland to Proton to provide the payment details from the user who had registered the VPN on a personal credit card. So it's not that Proton helped the FBI unmask an anonymous Stop Cop City protester by like decrypting their emails or sharing information about like the IP address where the account was created, though possibly they did. It is possible that they did share that information because it is information they could be compelled to present. And that is, by the way, also information that Proton Mail is compelled to keep and has to keep for a certain amount of time. If you are creating a Proton Mail account and you want it to be genuinely fucking private, you need to create the account from an anonymized browser, a traffic anonymized browser like Tor or something like that. Or created in a public space that's not close to where you are. That's not some place that you log in the regularly. Like that was the thing that ended up catching or tagging the French climate protesters who were arrested after using Proton Mail to organize some direct action, was the IP address where they had originally created the account was public, as well as information that is like mandatorily public as a function of the SMTP protocols. So like the subject line of the email is always going to be public because it has to as a function of the protocol. So basically the thing that unmasked this anonymous Stop Cop City protester was the fact that they paid for their VPN with a personal credit card. It's not that the privacy-focused service was intentionally exposing their information or was being particularly cooperative with the FBI, in which, as a law enforcement agency in a country where the information is not hosted. But yeah, people definitely misinterpreted the story because the story was written to be misinterpreted. It was written to be attention-getting. The headline. The story itself is not written to be attention-getting in the same way, and Joseph Cox, the author of this article, is not the person who chose to put the title on this article. 404 Media is the entity that chose to title this article in such an attention-grabbing, clickbaity way. And it's hard to even call it clickbait necessarily. Like, I almost am. It's almost more worthy of being called misinformation. And I'm really annoyed by it, and it's a massive fucking issue in our media space, and it's something that I know I've ranted about on Tumblr for a long fucking time. People don't read articles, and this has been a problem in media forever. People read headlines, people read, like, there's actually a diagram of, like, how much of an article people read by paragraph, and it's this sort of F-shaped thing. So it's like people read the full headline, people read the full subhead, they read most of the first paragraph, and then it kind of narrows down from there. Usually, like, if there's a pull quote in the middle, they'll read the full pull quote, which is why you get something that's kind of shaped like an F. So, it's this. It's, long line, short, long line, short, and diminishing into nothing. People, and that has always been true. That's why news stories are written in the format they are. I actually also kind of dislike the idea that we are in an information literacy era where people are like losing their attention spans. I think that people are definitely more distractible, but like people have never had the attention span to read a long article. Again, that's exactly why news stories are written with the inverted pyramid style that they are, where the first paragraph or two should have all of the information that you really need to walk away from the story with, which is also why burying the lead is an issue. So putting the information that actually it was the credit card processing details in this story, but only after it broke for the paid version. The title of this channel, the title of this stream is "If It Bleeds, It Leads." And if you're not familiar with what that means, "if it bleeds, it leads" is a phrase that is known to journalists because if a story is bloody, if a story is aggressive, if a story is attention-getting, it is going to lead. It is going to be the first thing in the story. So if it bleeds, it leads. It's a deeply annoying way of getting people's attention, and it is preying on cognitive patterns that I think are frustrating to deal with, and it has made me mad all the fucking time. Cybersecurity is complicated, and it's also, like, I think I talked about this in another stream. I may not have, but, like, it is actually, like, still one of the very unbalanced fields. So you see better, like, gender diversity in computer science than there was 15 years ago, but not really for InfoSec. InfoSec is still, like, I think it's better. It is definitely better, but I think it's like 35% not dudes, and a lot of it is still very cis and straight and white. So InfoSec is definitely, and it's insular in a way that a lot of other computer science stuff isn't. Partially because we're all assholes. Irrelevant Panda, thank you for your very relevant comment. The only true private digital life is off the grid living in the forest. Like, it's actually something that I think is a big problem in terms of information literacy and like computer literacy and everything like that, is people genuinely don't know how much stuff their computers know about them. They don't know what's being recorded. They don't know what logs are. Like, so it is kind of an issue. But yeah. So it's actually interesting. I am. So, Laughing Cat 2003. This seems to be a very misleading headline, but one of my coworkers is a former reporter and said that reporters are starting to use generative AI to write the headlines and parts of their stories. What they actually write tends to be buried further down in the story. I'm guessing this is why more and more often you don't get the actual news until halfway through the article now. No. And this is one of the reasons that I am kind of more moderate on a lot of AI stuff than a lot of people are. We started using AI, generative AI, to write sports stories in newsrooms in 2009. Like, it's been around a lot longer than people realize, and it was something that sports stories are very formulaic, and a lot of sports reporting is specifically reporting on statistics that are easily available in, you can subscribe to get the statistics, and then the story is written around it. It was something that, like, again, in 2009, like, it was controversial in my newsroom, and I remember that's when I was the managing editor of my college paper. I was the editor-in-chief of my college magazine. I was still definitely very much a journalism student and had been doing journalism for a while. And yeah, it's been around for a long time. And for stuff that's formulaic, it is like writing the kind of like sports writing can be wonderful, can be a lot of fun, but a lot of sports writing is exceptionally boring because it's just reporting statistics. It's just reporting scores. Who had this many outs in this inning, and, if there were any injuries or anything like that, all of which is just, again, really formulaic information that you can basically get in a spreadsheet. So throwing in a few like adjectives or something like that to like kind of vary it from paper to paper is enough to create a different sports story. Now, again, this was controversial in our newsrooms even at the time. People generally didn't like it. However, at the time, the other thing that was going on, I had a friend who was writing for the OC Register. He was doing bar and restaurant reviews, and the deal is they wanted him doing 3 bar reviews a week, which took him a couple hours each time. They paid him $20 per review, which did not include the cost of drinks and food. And on top of that, they also wanted him to do a full news story every week, plus a blog, at least one blog post every day. My advisor, who was also working for the OC Register, he was not doing that kind of bar reporting. He was an actual like reporter who had been there for quite a while. And I think his deal was that he had to have like 2 published stories a week that were like published in the actual printed paper, and then also 2 blog posts a day on news topics. So when you are being forced to churn out information at that level, that's when you start to see that, like, okay, cool, automating the way that sports stories are written becomes a lot more fucking appealing, because it's not like you're putting out quality anyway, which is one of the places where I get into the idea of like Gen AI and misinformation and poor quality writing and just garbage articles and everything like that. Humans are so good at making trash. I have seen shit stories published in high volume for a very long time. I am not too terribly worried still about AI as misinformation in terms of like stories being churned out, or about them affecting quality too much, because I think, that is one of those places where I think that genuinely this is going to be determined by the market. People who want to read crap writing are going to read crap writing, whether it's written by a robot or written by a human. People who don't want to read crap writing are not going to read crap writing, whether or not it's written by a robot or a human. It's simply going to be determined by what people want to read. And I think that the real issue with AI writing is that it's boring. But yeah, these are and again, this is a part of why I'm more moderate on the AI thing, is I have seen it a lot longer than a lot of people have, and the writing is better than it was in 2009, but not by a lot. Personally, I don't think it's better by a lot. It's still the kind of thing that like won't even fully replace a baby reporter if the baby reporter is taught well. The issue is that we're not teaching baby reporters well, because the way that you pay for your magazine to exist or your newspaper to exist is by putting shit headlines on things and getting to people to click through, because the entire thing is based on advertising and eyeballs, and it's a massive fucking issue that like the only way that you get good information is by paying for it. That's the thing that's really the fucking problem if we want to talk about the media environment. Journalists aren't fucking paid enough. They've got heavy loads, and they always fucking have, and they're expected to churn out a lot, and people keep getting fired, and there are not union protections for them the way that they should be, and you see massive layoffs happening all over the place that were going to happen regardless of whether or not AI came into any of this shit. Newspapers have been getting crushed and protracted for a long fucking time, and part of that is because literally they never figured out how the thing was going to be paid. They didn't figure out how it was going to be funded. Newspapers and like physical publications were so far behind in terms of how they were going to be funded that they really never, like, the advertising model that they use and the subscription model that they use doesn't work. They're still behind on like getting paid on the internet and getting caught up in the whole like Facebook pivot to video thing where it's like we're not actually getting paid for those views. Like, they need a different model. And my agro-anarcho-socialist opinion is that it should all be fucking free, and you ask people to pay you because they like the information that you provide, or they want the information that you provide. And I honestly think that there should be like government funding for this kind of thing, because I think you could probably pay for like most newspapers in the US with like one F-35. So fuck the F-35s. Let's have some fucking journalism that's actually not relying on people clicking on a story with an incredibly misleading headline. So that was a rant. So and yeah, and again, I'm not mad at you for the misperception, but the deal is like it's been a problem for so much longer than people realize, because there is there's a recency bias with looking at a lot of these things. You know, we look at it and we go, everything's so different than it used to be. But like, I started doing journalism like in high school in the very early 2000s, and like stopped my journalism career in like, well, I guess it depends on how you define journalism, but like stopped working with like a weekly newspaper in 2011, and then only did mild online media stuff for a while after that. But like, I still have a lot more insight into it than a lot of people do. And I have so many fucking opinions about it. And I had opinions about it when I was still doing like traditional journalism. Yep, 2009 is when I started first encountering Gen AI. Partially because a lot of news production is really, really formulaic. And yeah, the absurd article churn has been there for a while. Like, one of the things that you'll find, and that I ran into a lot when I started doing like tech information stuff, like tech write-ups and things like that, is you can find a ton of really, truly terrible news articles about how to do tech stuff from like 2012 to 2018 that are largely written by people who are trying to build a brand for themselves by writing about tech and doing it very, very poorly. So again, humans are in some ways better at churning out misinformation than robots are, simply because humans are more trusted than robots are in a lot of cases. So, and yeah, being able to afford access to multiple decent sources, like you get locked out of it. And so you end up just with like, hey, cool, what's free? Well, The Guardian is free, but The Guardian is like the turf newspaper of choice. What's free? Fucking Fox is free. CNN is free for some things, but CNN's also not great. And so you just end up like, it's okay, PBS is free, but it's largely audio. And so you end up with people unable to access information. Basically, I think that people are just trying to cram Gen AI and LLMs into places where it's absolutely unnecessary because A, it's the new hotness and they were promised it was going to be important the same way that they were promised that blockchain was going to be important. It fucking wasn't. And B, now it's being pushed really heavily by the manufacturers. But it's really interesting because, again, if you've been close to this scene at all, like, if you've been on Tumblr, I don't know if any of you all remember the AI Frank. One of the things that I reblogged recently was Frank was Nostalgia Braced Autoresponder. Nostalgia Braced was a Tumblr user who I reblogged a story recently that quoted him because he was writing about AI because Frank was a GPT-3 bot that had been trained on his posts that ran on Tumblr for years and was like perfectly well beloved and definitely had like the tone and cadence of a Tumblr writer and like definitely had very human seeming moments. There was a lot of garbage that Frank churned out also, but there was also a lot of poetry that Frank created. And the thing is, I think Frank started in like 2018. Like Frank was on Tumblr for a long time before people started talking about Gen AI stuff and before it went absolutely bug fuck insane. So having observed this space again, starting to see it initially in 2009, seeing it like take different forms, it really, like the meteoric takeoff and the discussion around it feels very businessy, not very technology focused. And that's the deal, is it feels the same as like people talking about cryptocurrencies, people talking about blockchain, people talking about NFTs, because it has now been picked up by the business people who talk about these things, not because the science or the technology is actually there in a way that matters. It seems like if you're an advanced programmer who understands things well, if you're a senior programmer, it can make you faster, but it shouldn't replace introductory programming. So it's the kind of thing where it's like it can help people who are already really advanced, but it shouldn't replace people who are advanced, and it shouldn't replace people who are brand new, because it's just not going to work for fucking either. And everybody at the top in the decision making field is going like, oh well, this should replace at least one of these two things, and it's like, nope. So the deal with Frank being like super fine tuned and everything is like most models are like especially if people have been like narrowly tuning it to a specific purpose, is like most models are pretty fine-tuned. I think a lot of the things that people are looking at that's producing such trash are things that are not fine-tuned. And so that's also part of the reason that I think that people are like really reactionary and negative about stuff, is because they're looking at general models. This came up when I was at the tech conference that I was at last year, that was like the tech conference that I went to for work. Like there was one guy there who had a talk that I actually really liked, and it was about how we are over-promising for AI. That we are telling people that it can deliver a ton of things, and it actually can't, and it's going to become a problem. And he was 100% correct, and it has become a problem. And he was also talking about the fact that in tech generally, we overpromise really significantly in ways that cause massive fucking problems. So the idea of saying that, your antivirus is going to protect you from viruses. No, it's not. It's going to protect you from a lot of viruses. It's going to protect you from known viruses, but it's not going to protect you from 0 days. It's not going to protect you from like certain kinds of code injection. Like it's going to protect you from some stuff, but it's not going to protect you. And that's where people get into problems, because they don't understand tech. They don't understand what these things can do. They don't understand the risk. Same deal with the AI. They have no idea what it can do. And all of the AI manufacturers are telling them that it can do everything, and if they haven't interacted with it deeply on a subject in which they are an expert, they might think that it can do everything, because look, it can draw better than them, but if you're an artist, you look at AI art and you go, that's like really boring and kind of looks like shit. It can write better than them, but if you're a writer, you read AI writing, it's kind of boring and looks like shit, and reads like shit. And I know that it's that's also true for a lot of like experimental stuff. That's also true for programming. Like, and the deal is, if you interact with this stuff at like an expert in like whatever it is you're an expert in, like anytime you tell an AI to spit out like a list of, give me some recipe ideas from the list of food that's in my fridge, a lot of the stuff that it's going to give you is going to be trash. But if you don't cook regularly, you're not going to recognize that. So, and I think the deal is just not enough people have interacted with these things in their specific domains to realize how not good they are still. Sorry, I'm still. And there is stuff. So, Spiraling, you actually use the example of translation. And, like, I don't think that we're to the point that AI would be able to do, like, good translation. However, it does a pretty good job of literal word-for-word translation if you need to actually figure out what people are saying while in a conversation with them, while you're someplace that you don't speak the language. That's pretty neat. And I think there was something that was debuted at CES this year that was like an on-device translator that at the very least would be able to get you like a word-for-word translation in a couple of specific contexts. And you know what? That may be something where we're a decade away maybe from having something really good, but I think that we're telling people that it's going to show up next month, and anybody who's ever tried to translate from one language to another can tell you, no, it's not. So your friend, Bixby, this is an interesting comment. My friend is a programmer, and she says that it can help, but it turns out weird errors that people wouldn't normally make, which are harder to track down. So the thing about it with like programming is that the way that I've heard people describing how they use it is like they go and it's like, I used to go grab libraries because I would be having to go grab the libraries myself, but instead I can tell it to do this because that's a very formulaic part of the process. So it just saves me that formulaic part of the process. But if you've got somebody who doesn't even know what they're doing, kind of generally asking, like if I were to feed pseudocode into Claude Programmer or whatever the fuck it is, it would probably generate some code that would work better than whatever I could write, but it would probably have really glaring failures that are unusual in terms of like normal programmers who know how to do this wouldn't have written it that way. But like it'll probably have weirder errors than like I would be able to generate as somebody who was learning in a like stable, standardized way, or that somebody who'd been doing it for a long time would create, because it's attempting to like think for itself. So like again, like I know people who definitely can use it as part of their workflow to improve their workflow, but you still don't just want it doing the thing because it's not great at it. I'm still sort of ranting about the topic that's up on the window right now. The deal is that long story short, media is bad at being media. It always has been bad at being media. Everything is on fire all the time, and I'm sorry. Can we talk about prompt injection attacks and how there's no way to perfectly guard against them because you can't sanitize your fucking inputs? It's insane to me that people are attempting to do anything. I opened up like office.com today, and like the first thing that it did was drop me into Copilot, and it's like, I want nothing to do with that. I'm looking for information about this other thing. I don't want to talk to Google search, which is basically what you're doing. Like, I want a list. I want a sitemap. Give me a fucking sitemap. Why are you replacing the sitemap? Because this is just not going to be. And the deal is, I think a huge part of it with like Microsoft and everything, I think a huge fucking part of that is advertising. Because, if you're not sanitizing your inputs, then it could be any manner of things. So you could return any manner of results, and so you can return things that people are going to have to fucking pay for. It makes me insane. Yeah, Copilot is fucking infuriating. I fucking hate Copilot. Also, thankfully, pretty much everybody at work who has ordered Copilot from me is asking me to cancel it on their 1-year renewal. So fuck Copilot. I hate Copilot. All my homies hate Copilot. Fucking Copilot. And yeah, the idea of updating your language habits to interact with. Okay, so again, it's insane that the only way to interact with it is in a form of communication which has like so much potential nuance and so many potential ways to go wrong that it allows for like prompt injections. But this is also one of those things where I'm kind of looking at it. It's sort of the same thing that I'm looking at with like the protester in the story here. You weren't sanitizing your inputs. Why were you letting it doing anything if it couldn't fucking sanitize the inputs? What are you doing? Don't let it have access to systems if you can't sanitize the fucking inputs. That is security 101. What the fuck are you doing? And people are making really odd decisions around that I don't fully understand. But basically, like, yeah, AI shouldn't be touching stuff that needs to be secure at this point because it's impossible to protect against those kinds of things. And I have this discomfort with the notion of having to regularly update my language habits to interact with something that does not itself experience emotion. And secondly, about the implication of LLM use exaggerating semantic drift. A thing that I noticed was that if you write these things with the right language, it'll give better info, and then give junk if you write it with less specific language/jargon. This ends up being more bad info being handed to beginners of topics. That is actually a really interesting thing to look at, and it's people used to talk about the idea of having like Google foo or whatever, where it was like you would be great at searching Google, like way better than your peers at searching Google. And a lot of it was writing those very specific kinds of like queries and things like that, and like figuring out the way to phrase things in such a way that it would return information to you. Now Google just doesn't return any information to you. Now it's just shit. Everything's shit. Everything's on fire forever. I'm still better at Google than most people. I'm still better at most searches than most people, but it's because like I'm an obsessive freak about that, and I have dealt with the semantic drift of it. I have had to learn the ways to continually say things to these systems to get better information. And like that's why they have all those fucking prompt writing boot camps. It's also why people end up getting, talking about like earlier with Max getting locked into ecosystems. Like one of the things, part of the reason that people are asking me to cancel their Copilot licenses is because they're finding that they can't talk to it the same way that they talk to ChatGPT. They have to have a different language structure specifically to interact with that one, and it causes problems. And having to learn like the accent of the AI that you're talking to, or the diction of the AI that you're talking to, so that you get the best results out of it, like it is a fucking problem. And I mean, I'm very much a descriptivist in terms of linguistics, like, language is what it does. Like, the rules are going to change based on how people use it. We have a lot of semantical drift simply because we all talk a lot more than we used to, and things happen faster than they used to. But I'm not tremendously worried about that, but I am worried about the idea of like, almost like having to learn a programming language, like, oh, okay, well, there's some overlap here, but like, I'm more I know C better than I know Python, so I, just do as much as I can in C instead of Python. And if I have to go over, I understand the same concepts. And it's like, well, I know Claude better than I know Copilot, and like I'm not very familiar with ChatGPT at all, so like I just try to avoid those things. And it's like this ends up locking us into ecosystems where people get like absolutely fucking murdered by rent seeking, because at the moment, remember, a lot of this stuff started free. And then it became a paid subscription, and it's going to get to be a more expensive subscription, especially as fewer people buy into it than were anticipated. So that was actually one of the fun things of the conference was, I guess the blue hair is why people were coming up to me, but there were a bunch of like middle-aged and older men who were approaching me and who were like, what do you think of this whole ChatGPT AI thing? And I was like, I think it's bullshit. And they were like, good, me too. Explain why, because I can't, and my kids say it's good. I'm like, okay.